Hi, good morning. Good morning. Welcome back. Hope you had a wonderful break, that you took time to recover, to de-stress. And as it happens, this is the topic today, or we'll continue from where we left off before break. So, remember we talked about the idea that, in fact, stress wasn't the problem, which was the most interesting, surprising, but in retrospect, obvious finding of the research on stress, that stress in and of itself is actually good. Just like in athletics, just like in sports, when we stress a muscle, the muscle develops, it grows. When we stress ourselves psychologically, emotionally, we grow, we become more resilient, we become stronger. It is not good for a person who's just born to be put in a sterile environment and be protected from all the stresses of the outside world, such as bacteria, for example, which stresses the system because it forces it to create antibodies. It's not good for us to be in a sterile environment, not physically, whether it's in a closed environment as babies, not physically in terms of not doing any sports, not pushing ourselves, and also not mentally and emotionally, which is why I said, time and again, I wish that you fail more, because I think it is important to go through hardships, through difficulties. And in fact, we're going to talk about failure right after we finish up with a goal-setting lecture, when we discuss perfectionism, which is all about our approach toward failure. So stress is not the problem. The problem is lack of recovery, and that is what we don't have enough of in our culture, not just at Harvard. In most workplaces, there is not enough place for recovery. In most schools, most universities, which explains why levels of stress translate themselves to chronic stress, translate themselves to chronic anxiety, translate themselves to depression. It's because we don't have the recovery. And we talked about recovery on a few levels. So just a quick recap. We talked about recovery on the micro level, which is, for example, every 90 minutes of sprint, 15 minutes break. Instead of being marathon runners, being sprinters. It's a 15-minute meditation. It's a 1-hour lunch where we really give ourselves time to recover. It's going to the gym on a regular basis. It's the 15-minute listening to our favorite piece of music, speaking to a friend or whatever it is, the recovery on the micro level. And people who recover, who have recoveries during their workday, and this is research done across the river by people like Teresa Amabile or Leslie Perlow, show how important it is in the workplace to have recoveries. And people who do it are more productive, more creative, and in the long term, also happier. Higher levels of job satisfaction. Recovery also on the meso level, the full night's sleep. The day off during once a week at least. Time off, recreate so that we can create. And finally, the vacations, holidays, longer periods. You see, the other thing that happens when we're constantly on the run is that we miss the beauty that's all around us and within us. We miss the real potential for happiness, for joy, for appreciation that surrounds us day in and day out. And that's why we take things for granted, because we don't take the time to appreciate, to savor. And it's not natural to do so. I mean, can you imagine a lion living in our modern world? Can you imagine a lion working at McKinsey or in investment banking or being on the tenure track? It's unnatural. You know, what a lion needs to do is yawn. They need to play. It is natural. And remember what we talked about during the first couple of lectures. The constraint view of human nature. Nature to be commanded must be obeyed. Our nature dictates that we need recovery. All animals do. And when we frustrate a psychological, physical need, we pay a price for it. Whether it's the need for recovery or the need for physical exercise or the need for certain vitamins or protein, we pay a price for it. And the key is to introduce these natural recovery periods into our lives. And here is the key. The key is focus. Focus on both work as well as recovery. So remember the question that we asked before break. What makes some individuals succeed despite living in the modern world or living with ambition and success? Well, these individuals know how to focus when they work and when they play. To use the cliche, they work hard and they play hard. What does that mean specifically? First of all, in recovery, they understand that quantity affects quality. Let me share with you a study that you read about in the book. This is by Nobel Prize winner, the Israeli psychologist Daniel Kahneman, won a Nobel Prize for economics, turned positive psychologist. What he wanted to understand was the affective, the emotional experiences of women during the day. And what he did was ask women to evaluate their experiences right after they had that particular experience. So what was it like for you? And they evaluated their experience at work, they evaluated their experience shopping, they evaluated their experience spending time with their intimate partners, with their children, having lunch with friends, whatever it was. They evaluated how they were doing during the day. And the most surprising finding of this result was that these women did not particularly enjoy time they spent with their kids. Now, this result was very surprising to Kahneman, and when he probed further, he and his co-authors, it wasn't the fact that the women didn't love their kids. I mean, they loved their kids. For most of these women, kids were the most meaningful, important thing in their lives. However, their experience with their kids often was not pleasurable, the second component of happiness. Very meaningful, but not always pleasurable. Why? When they probed further, they found out exactly why. Because these women, when they were with their kids, they were not really with their kids. Meaning, they were on the phone at the same time, or doing email, or thinking about what they did earlier at work, or what they have to do later at home. They were distracted, and they were not present with their kids. Now, individually, discreetly, they may have really enjoyed being on the phone with a friend, or doing work, or thinking about work, or thinking about what they have to do later. Each discrete individual activity may have been a lot of fun, but together it was too much of a good thing. And quantity affects quality. I mean, think about the following analogy. Think about your favorite piece of music and listening to it with your eyes closed and focused. So your favorite piece of music, if it's like mine, probably is, it's Whitney Houston's And I Will Always Love You. Thank you. Yes, there's another one here with good taste in music. And you listen to Whitney Houston or whatever your favorite piece of music is, your eyes closed and you focus, and then you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And of course, perfect 10. You're touched, you're moved, you're inspired. And then you listen to your second most favorite piece of music, which, if it is like mine, it's the chorus piece from Beethoven's Ninth. And you listen to it, you focus on it, and again you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Not quite And I Will Always Love You, but it's a 9.5. And then, for maximal effect, you take the two pieces together and play them. And what do you get? A 19.5, right? No, not a 10, not even a 5. It's noise. This is modern life for you. This is modern life. We have activities, we have so many wonderful things in our lives, but we have too many of them. And you know what that often does? It very often leads to guilt and frustration. Why? Because I say to myself, how is that possible? I love doing what I'm doing. I'm so fortunate to have so many amazing, wonderful things, people, experiences in my life, and yet I fail to be happy. There must be something wrong with me. No, there's nothing wrong with you. It's perfectly natural. Just like you will not be able to enjoy the two pieces of music played together, even though individually they're your two most favorite pieces of music. Too much of a good thing. Quantity does affect quality. Now, this happens constantly. And it happened to me 2 years ago when I was teaching positive psych. It was about 1 month into the semester, and it just didn't make sense to me. Why wasn't I happy? The class was doing well. I was enjoying the class. I was doing a lot of work, consulting. I was speaking around the country about positive psychology, about Israel. I was writing. I'm doing all the things that I love, that I care about, that I'm passionate about. Spending time with my family. Then I took a step back and I realized too much of a good thing. And as soon as I cut the activities, happiness level went back up again. Quantity affects quality. Researchers on relationships and love, the Hendricks couple, say, love and sex are affected negatively by stress. If we can help people to simplify their lives, thus reducing their stress levels, it is very likely that people's relationships would be enriched greatly. Moreover, the positive aspects of their lives would be enriched accordingly. It affects every area of our lives, whether it's our love life, whether it's our experience with our kids, whether it's our experience doing work or reading, spending time with friends, or writing. There can be too much of a good thing. So if we have lunch and we use lunch as recovery, and at the same time we're on the phone and doing email, that's not recovery, that's simply more stress. But if we have just lunch and focus on our eating and enjoy it, or just spend time with people we love, that's recovery. The key is focus. The same thing applies to work. Now, it's not possible in our world today, certainly not in leadership positions, which many of you have already got and will assume in the future. It's not possible to eliminate multitasking. The key, though, is to reduce it. Just a quick show of hands. How many people here, while you're doing work that requires concentration, that requires focus, whether it's writing or doing reading or anything else that requires concentration, how many people here have their emails on at the same time? Okay, it's the majority. It's most people in the West who do that. I used to do that too, until I found out about this research. When you have your email on while you're doing work that requires concentration, it is equivalent to taking off 10 IQ points. 10 IQ points. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't spare 10 IQ points. Now, for comparison's sake, if you lose a whole night's sleep, so if you haven't slept for 36 hours, your IQ is reduced by the equivalent of 10 points. Another point of comparison, if you smoke marijuana, if you smoke grass, your IQ is reduced by 4 points. So if you have, look, I mean, it's the choice. More fun, less IQ point, well, but don't inhale. And I hope you didn't record that there. Here is the study. This was done at the, in the University of London. The IQ of those who try to juggle messages and work fell by 10 points, the equivalent of missing a whole night's sleep and more than double the 4-point fall seen after smoking marijuana. Look, nothing will happen if you switch off your email for 2 hours at a time. Nothing will, except for one thing will happen. You'll get another message saying, you know, the server may have been down earlier, so I'm not sure you got my email. Right, you get those emails if you don't respond for about an hour or two? The server may have been down. But other than that, nothing will happen if you don't respond to emails, if you don't have your emails on for 2-3 hours. Nothing will happen if you don't answer the phone every moment. Unless you're an ambulance driver, in which case you should have it on. But otherwise, it's fine. Switch it off. Doing less. And when you do less, you get so much more done. Creativity goes up. Productivity goes up. Work satisfaction goes up. Because when we're distracted, there can be too much of a good thing. I've spoken about so many techniques already, and we'll speak about some more, about journaling, about doing gratitude exercise, about writing a gratitude letter. I'm going to talk about doing more physical exercise. We talked about acts of kindness and so many things. But really the key thing is actually not to do additional things, but to do less. Or rather, to identify the things that you really, really want to do with your life and do them. Because quantity affects quality. Tim Castor, a humanistic psychologist, has done research on time affluence. As we know from research, material affluence matters very little to our well-being. Beyond having our basic needs met, hardly even affects our well-being. However, what does affect our well-being is what Castor calls time affluence, which is the feeling that we have time, the feeling that we can savor the things that we're doing, that we're not constantly chasing our own shadow, that we're not constantly running around and feeling stressed. And people who have time affluence in their lives, that is a good predictor of well-being. And that is something that we can introduce. Granted, more difficult in a place like this where there are so many appealing distractions. And I'm using the word distractions here, even though many of these things may be wonderful, amazing, meaningful things to you. But when they all come together, it becomes, unfortunately, the experience of distraction. In our modern world, functionality is being pitted against fun. The question is, how do you make our life fun as well as functionality, which is parallel to the present and future benefits? And what we know is that when we have recovery, fun recovery in our lives, listening to our favorite piece of music and only listening to our favorite piece of music, and one at a time, or having lunch with friends or a nice dinner in our house with our roommates, when we savor the time together, it's not just fun, it's also functional. It's also a form of recovery. And the question is, how do you reconcile? How do you do the end? Because remember the question that positive psychologists ask, what do people who are happy, healthy, and successful do? And once they started to ask this question, it opened up all the possibilities. All the answers came rushing in, literally. And one of the answers is focus on work, focus on recovery. You'll get much more done and much better. One of the shortest, if not the shortest word in the English language, and yet people are so afraid of it, saying no. Whether it's saying no to people who ask you something, again, saying no empathically, or saying no to opportunities. Because essentially when we're saying no to some opportunities, when we're saying no to some offers, we're saying yes to ourselves. And how do we choose what we say no to and what we say yes to? By simply asking, what do I really, really, really want to do? Simplifying, doing less rather than more. The key, though, is to reach optimum levels of simplicity, because we don't want to simplify too much and go to the other extreme. You see, in a way, it works as many things work, many psychological phenomena work in a curvilinear manner. Let me explain. So let's say we have a graph where this is amount of work, and on this axis we have productivity, creativity, and happiness. The way it works, the way it looks is this way. Meaning, if our amount of work is too high, that's when we experience the TBD, too busy disorder. We're unhappy, we're not creative, and we're not productive. This is the burnout. We may be productive and creative for a short while, but this is the burnout phase. On the other hand, if we do too little, that's also not good. And very similar consequences. We're unhappy, we're certainly not productive, and we're not creative. This is extreme procrastination, which we'll talk about in a minute. This is overwork. What we want to find is our optimum. For each person, this is in a different place. I mean, this graph can be situated here for one person and here for another. But each person has this optimal level. And this is where highest level of productivity, creativity, and happiness. So on the one extreme, we have the law of gases essentially applied to time management. That even if we have very little work, it will take up all of our time. And then we're not productive, not creative, not happy. On the other hand, we have the quote that I've used time and again by J.P. Morgan, that he can do a year's work in 9 months but not in 12. And the need for time off. Where is your optimal level? Where are you between these two? You need to find out. It's trial and error. And it's a lot of error. And that's okay. That's how we learn. Essentially what we're about is sustainable growth. Henry David Thoreau, simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say let your affairs be as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen. In the midst of this chopping sea of civilized life, such are the clouds and storms and quicksands and the 1,001 items to be allowed for. And he must be a great calculator indeed who succeeds. Simplify, simplify. This was written around 1840. How much more do we need to simplify today in the 21st century? And what we are about, again, is sustainable growth. I've used this metaphor from environmentalism. What's sustainable growth? So when a country like Senegal is now talking about sustainable growth, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that it wants to freeze progress. It means that it wants to grow. However, in a sustainable way, which means let's take out of the environment what can be replenished naturally through our help. The exact same thing we're talking about on the psychological level. We're not talking about a stress-free life, a life where we don't take out of ourselves, when we don't push ourselves, when we don't exert ourselves. What we're talking about when we talk about sustainable growth is that we take out of ourselves, we exert, we stress ourselves, and replenish through recovery. Just enough so that it's sustainable. Because if we don't replenish, then it's not sustainable, and then we begin to experience anxiety, depression, burnout, and so on. So ask yourself, where do I in my life need to simplify? Where do I in my life need to do more? How can I, in other words, overcome procrastination? Going back to our friend. Because this may be a little bit too extreme. You know that 70%, more than 70% of college students nationwide complain about procrastination. Not others' procrastination, their own procrastination. The other 30% are in denial. No. Over 70%. Now, procrastination is associated with lower levels of happiness, weakened physical immune system, higher levels of stress, and could also lead to depression. Not a very high correlation, but there is a positive correlation between the two. Fortunately, though, there's a lot of research on procrastination, and research that can actually help. And the research is done at the University of Carleton in Canada, where they have an actual procrastination research group. And I browsed them. You can go on their website, great website, and there are great pictures there. And one of the set of pictures is from their yearly conference on procrastination, which is remarkable. So here are some photos from that very important conference. So on the first day, they all arrived and they got together for a meal. And after they got together for a meal, they had another meal because they were hungry a few hours later. And then the following day, they just hung out and walked around. It was a beautiful place after all. And afterwards, they had some food together. And then, food begets food, so they ate some more. And at the end of the conference, they really felt like they accomplished a lot. They practiced what they preached, so they had a photo and all of them together right here. Actually, they do fascinating work and very important work on procrastination. So here are some of the results, some of the important results for overcoming procrastination. First, most important one, simple, easy to implement, and it works, is what they call the 5-minute takeoff. One of the things that they found with just about all procrastinators is that they have a misunderstanding of what it takes to act. Procrastinators the world over think that in order to act, they first need to be inspired. I have to feel the vibes before I start this Act 10 problem set. I really have to be inspired before I write this paper for Lit and Arts. But you know what? That's not how it works. That's not how it works. It's not about first changing our attitude, i.e. becoming inspired, and then acting. It usually works the other way around. We first need to start acting behavior that will then affect our attitude. Because very often once we start, we're on a roll. Or sometimes, a few times during, let's say, the 9-minute sprint, we have to restart the 5 minutes. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you haven't, it's something that I'd really like to share with you. By now, we know one another pretty well, or you know me pretty well. So, if you don't know this, I think you should know this. I am extremely passionate about positive psychology. I love positive psychology. But sometimes when I get up in the morning and I write something about positive psychology or prepare a lecture on positive psychology or read positive psychology, sometimes I don't feel like starting. This was actually a very big surprise for my wife, and it only came up just a couple of years into our marriage, where I told her, sometimes I really don't feel like getting up. She said, how's that possible? I mean, you get up in the morning and then you go to your computer and you start to work on it. Yes, exactly, because I know the 5-minute takeoff. And sometimes within a 90-minute session, I have to do another 5-minute takeoff because my energy levels are drained. So either take time off to recover, or if I think that it's just procrastination, I say, okay, for 5 minutes, just push. And very often that 5 minutes starts an upward spiral. Not through the mind, not through the heart, through action. The 5-minute takeoff, probably the most useful technique for overcoming procrastination. Just do it, in other words. Reward yourself. Businesses are built. Can you imagine a business without a reward? Well, think about the self-inc. You're a certain business. You want to motivate yourself. So reward yourself. Okay, I'm going to do 3 hours of work now, and then allow myself a 3-hour meal in the dining hall as a reward. Or I'm going to really work hard on Friday so that Saturday I can go out. That's okay. We do it in every other place. But no, again, we say, no, I need to be inspired for this problem set. Yes, sometimes, but sometimes we're not that inspired. And rewards are certainly legit and important. Go public. Throw your knapsack over the wall. Tell people what you're going to achieve. This is exactly what I did in 1995 when I first decided to teach workshops in psychology. I was working in Singapore at the time. I called up my boss, Mr. Hugh Hong, and I said to him, Hugh, I want to teach a workshop, or 2-day workshops, one on leadership, one on the pursuit of excellence, on success. And he said, that's great. I think it will really help the employees. When do you want to do it by? I said, July 1. This was January of 2005. And he said, fine. Put down the phone. I called him. I was here at the time. I called him up. And as soon as I put down the phone, I said, oh, shoot. What have I just done? One of the best things that I ever did. Because I went public with it. I threw my knapsack over the wall, and I had to start working, whether I liked it or not. And that helped me overcome procrastination, because I knew that I wanted to teach at some point, but when I went public with it, in a sense, it forced me to do it. And I gave a workshop. It wasn't the best workshop in July of 1995, but I did it, and I worked extremely hard toward it. The team approach. The best predictor, for example, of maintaining an exercise regime is doing it with other people. Now, this is not right for everyone. Some people, exercise is something that they want to do by themselves, just with their, Discman or just by themselves at home. And that's okay. However, for most people, doing it with other people actually helps. It also helps to write down. This is a commitment. Write down goals, divide and conquer, break down achievement. Remember Langer's research? Write these things down. Make lists. They actually help most people. And finally, permission to recreate. What that means is that give yourself permission to be human. Give yourself permission to procrastinate at times as well. Give yourself permission to recover. You're not a machine. We're not machines. We need to understand the constraint view of nature. Because if we don't understand it, if we don't respect nature, nature is not going to respect us. And we're going to pay a price in terms of our productivity, our creativity, as well as our happiness, the ultimate currency. I want to show you a quick excerpt by my favorite, Ellen DeGeneres. And this is the end of her show on procrastination, which I highly, highly recommend. You can find it in any of the video stores around here. So here she is, the end of the show, after she has talked about procrastination for over an hour. The one and only.
We're doing all these things to squeeze things together so we can save time. And I don't know about you, but I don't have any more time. I have less time. But let's just say we could save up a whole chunk of time and set it aside. You know what we do with it? Nothing. Nothing at all. Isn't that the point, to be able to do nothing at all? But we're not guaranteed that later on chunk of time. All we have is here and now. And that's why procrastination feels so right. Procrastination is not the problem. It is the solution. It is the universe's way of saying, stop, slow down, you move too fast. Listen to the music. Whoa, whoa, listen to the music. What I'm trying to say is, if you leave here tonight and you don't remember anything else that I said, leave here and remember this. Procrastinate now. Don't put it off.
Okay. Out of everything that I teach, this lecture, this topic is the most personally meaningful to me. Because in many ways, my shift, my journey from perfectionism, and it's an ongoing journey, a journey that it goes on right now as we speak. My journey from perfectionism to the pursuit of excellence is most intimately linked with my journey toward becoming happier. So I want to share with you some personal things that I've been through. Some of them are in my book, but I want to expand the story beyond squash. So I started playing squash at the age of 11, which was after giving up an illustrious, passionate career as a basketball star. It was about that time when I realized that NBA was not going to happen for me. I started playing squash and almost immediately started playing every day. My days revolved, my life at that time revolved around squash. I would wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and go for a run. I would come home, have my food, go to school. Right after school, it was next to the squash, not far from the squash course. I would go to the squash course, play with my coach, work out in the gym, play games, and then late afternoon I would go home, do my homework, and then go to sleep. For years, this was my pattern. It was difficult, it was tough, especially the interval training workouts with my coach. However, it was nothing. The toughness was nothing compared to the emotional difficulties at the time. I was constantly, with almost no recovery, no reprieve, I was constantly stressed. There was always a knot that I felt in my stomach. It was real, as if there was a ball here. The knot was especially pronounced, especially difficult after a poor performance in practice, when it didn't match to the standards that I had for myself. And it almost never matched. The knot was at its severest during tournaments. Very often I would get to a final of an important tournament and choke and lose the final, even at times when I was supposed to win, on paper at least. That knot didn't go away. When it went away, it was only for very short periods of time. But I knew that that knot would go away. And I was sustained by the belief, by the vision, by my personal mission at the time of winning the Israeli national championships. I said to myself, if I win this, then I'll be happy. Then I will be calm. And it's all going to be worth it. Why? Because no pain, no gain. In 1986, I reached the final of the Israeli national championships. And I lost. I was devastated. I was devastated even though I was the youngest player to ever reach the final, even though I had beaten players higher than me on the rankings. I was devastated for months. But still, I went on. No pain, no gain. And I continued to train and work hard. In 1987, I met the same player in the final, and this time I won. I was ecstatic, joyous, happier than I'd ever remembered myself being. And at that moment I said to myself, it all paid off. It was all worth it. Because now I was ready to be happy. I went out with my friends and family, and we celebrated. And about 4 hours later, after the celebrations, I went back home. I went back home and wanted, before going to sleep, just for one last time, savor, enjoy that feeling of joy, of ecstasy, of pure bliss that I'd earned. And I sat down on my bed, and then suddenly, without any warning, the exact same feeling, the exact same emotion, the exact same knot returned. And I started to cry. Not the same tears of joy that I cried 4 hours earlier, but tears of pain and helplessness. The knot returned, and I thought, well, maybe it's the low following a high. And I hoped that it would go away, but it didn't go away. And a few weeks later, I realized what it was, and this time I really nailed it. I understood. I would have to be the world champion to really be happy. I graduated from high school. I had 2 years before I had to enlist in the military, and I took off to England. In England, I lived in London and joined Stripes, which was a squash club in Ealing Broadway, where John Khan, world champion at the time, used to train. Because I said, this is my goal, this is my objective. And I would come in every single day and watch John Khan and imitate him. Whatever he did, I would do. So he ran 7 miles each morning. I would run 7 miles each morning. He would go to the court, work out in the gym. I did exactly what he did. He played numerous games with other players. I would play numerous games with other players. And he had training partners. And I wasn't good enough at that time to be his training partner, so I would just hang out there. And once in a while when there was no one else around, he would say, "Come, Tal, let's play a little bit." And we would play. And I went back to the drawing board after each game with him, and I would play harder and train harder, just what he did, because to be like him, to be the world champion, I would have to train like him. And I trained harder and harder, and I got better and better. And after about 6 months, I became good enough to be one of his training partners. And after a year, I became his regular training partners, and I would travel with him around the world. Wherever he would play tournaments, we would train before. However, injuries began to creep in. Why? Because Janchar had built up from literally the age of 3. He had built up his stamina, his fitness. And for me, it was all or nothing. Either I train like an amateur or don't train at all, or I train like the world champion. And my body couldn't handle it, and I started injuries. Initially, mild injuries. Ankle, I took 2 days off, or my knee started hurting a little bit, 3-4 days off. Back was a bit uncomfortable, nothing serious. I would go back to training, all or nothing. Either I don't train at all, or I train like the world champion, because I want to be like him. And I continued doing that for 4 years. Injuries on and off, getting more and more severe, until at the age of 20, 21, the doctor told me, "You have a choice. You can continue training and playing professional squash, but then you're risking your back and you will probably need to be operated on very soon. Or you can give up professional squash." With an extremely heavy heart, I gave up professional squash. I gave up my dream, applied to college, and came here. Here, the exact same pattern continued. Only before it was squash, now it was academics that became the central part of my life. The knot returned very shortly after freshman week, because every paper had to be perfect. Every word had to be read and summarized. Every assignment had to be executed immaculately, all or nothing. And I was unhappy. And it was on one day during my sophomore year, as a 23-year-old sophomore, where I said to myself, enough. Enough. Here I am in such a wonderful place, with such wonderful students, such wonderful teachers, such a privilege, and I'm so unhappy. I don't think it is something that is external. I must understand myself better. And it was at that point that I decided to switch my concentration to philosophy and psychology, wanting to understand the meaning of a happy life, wanting to understand how I could become happier and why I was not. And it was very quickly that I realized that I understood that I was engaged or suffering from something that is so common, so pervasive, and so misunderstood: perfectionism. This is what I want to talk about today, and what I want to talk about in the next lecture. This notion of perfectionism and what the research has to say about it. Now, there is no perfect perfectionist. There is no one person who is on this extreme, nor is there a perfect person who is on the excellence extreme, which I will depict later. The key is, how do I become happier? And I become happier by being less and less perfectionistic. Perfectionism is not about giving up ambition. I'm as ambitious, or possibly more ambitious, than I was at the age of 16 or 23. It's about having a different approach toward the journey of our life, toward each step of the way, specifically toward failure. So what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, define it so that we understand it, because it is misunderstood. I'm going to talk about characteristics. We're going to get to that next time only. The characteristics, what it means to be a perfectionist. Then I'm going to talk about the consequences. And then how it's possible to be both successful and happy. Again, the question that we asked in the goal-setting lecture, the question that essentially we're asking throughout the class. It's not about giving up success. It's not about giving up the conventional currency. But it's about also enjoying the ultimate currency, more importantly, because it is the ultimate currency. Then we understand what is the source of perfection. Where does it come from? Because if we understand where it comes from, we're much more likely to be able to overcome it. And then, most importantly, how do we overcome it? And how do we help other people overcome perfectionism? And again, not giving up their ambition, not giving up hard work, not giving up the pain of failure, because that's inevitable, but simply having a more rational, a more helpful, more empowering approach toward failure. Okay, so let's get to work. I need a volunteer. I need a volunteer, but before you put your hand up, it's a very special kind of volunteer. I need a volunteer who is a very good artist, a volunteer who can draw really well. No pressure here, right? A volunteer who can draw really well and who will actually come here and demonstrate. Now remember, it takes courage to come up to the stage, but courage is not about not having fear. It's about having fear and going ahead anyway. So, do I have a volunteer? I have a volunteer. Why don't you come up? Okay. Hi, what's your name? Vincent. Are you a VES concentrator? No. Don't tell me you're economics. Okay, what are you? Biology. Okay, good. All right, so biology, you have to draw many diagrams. That's why I was worried. Well, in Ec, you also have to draw diagrams, I guess. So it would have been fine, too. All right, are you ready for this? There's still an opportunity to go and sit down. Are you sure you want... All right, yes. Good. All right, are you ready for this, Vincent? You sure? All right, here's what I want you to do now. I don't know if I want to do this to you, though, you know. All right, but I'm going to do it to you anyway. I want you to draw here, on this part of the board. I want you to draw... Are you ready for this? You sure? Okay. I want you to draw a circle. Take your time. Take your time, no hurry. You can also erase and put back. But I want you to draw, give your best shot here. I want you to draw a circle. We have half an hour, no hurry. In the meantime, we'll meditate. Yeah, I didn't mean it literally half an hour, but okay. Okay. Use it as a time in, that's all. A circle. Vincent, well done. Woo! Okay, you're not done yet. Hey. Whoa. Don't run away on me now. Okay. So, I'm putting a line here. And what I'd like you to do here is draw something else. Are you ready for it? I would like you to draw another circle, but this time, as you drew it, or as you think you drew it, when you were 3 years old. 3 years old. Again, take your time, metaphorically speaking, take your time, and draw a circle as you think you drew it when you were 3 years old. All right. Yeah. And that's when his parents said, Van Gogh was reborn. Can you draw it as you drew it when you were 3 years old, please? I know that there are many very talented people here, but we want some real... Okay, all right. Still very talented 3 years old. Okay, all right, good. Now I want you to do one more thing. I want you to draw here another circle, this time as you drew, or you think you drew, or as you tried to draw when you were 1 year old. Okay, still a very talented 1 year old, but a 1 year old nevertheless. Good. All right, now, Vincent, the one thing that I really don't like doing teaching. I mean, I love to teach, but the one thing that I really don't like doing is grading. I hate grading. But you know, as a teacher, you have to do it. You have to do it. So I'm going to have to grade you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I look at this entity, and what I see is a circle, actually. You know, if I put a line in the middle, you know, more or less the equidistant from that point, if I put a point here, it's actually very good. Very good, Vincent. Well done. I'm proud of you. Well done. You passed. Yes, exactly. But, you know, I can't help but looking beyond, and I get here. And, you know, I'm trying to find the right word here, and what would the right word be? Disaster, maybe? I mean, Vincent, please, I mean, this is not a circle. And this? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's tough being a teacher, you know. But I have a question for you, Vincent. I have an important question for you. Could you have gotten to drawing a real circle without having drawn hundreds and thousands of failed circles? In other words, could you have gotten here without being here? Absolutely not. There is no other way to succeed. Thank you very much, Vincent. Learn to fail or fail to learn. There is no other way. You know, I'm a psychologist, and you know what psychologists do? Psychologists watch people. And I watch you every time you come to class. And I watch you very, very closely. And you know what I see? Again, this takes a lot of insight and experience and wisdom, but you know what I see every time when you come into the class? That you all are very good walkers. Terrific. In fact, you know, what you do is you come in and you lift your left leg, and then your ankle slightly is moved up, and then very gracefully, as you put it down, you lift your back heel. You do it so beautifully, so elegantly, and you know what? You pretend as if you're not even noticing it. So at the same time, you're talking to a friend. Some of you are even chewing gum at the same time, which is more than Einstein could do. And then you lift up the back leg, and again, so gracefully, just, you know, you bend your knee slightly, this action, and then you move your arm at the same time. It's a beauty. And then you just swing your hips slightly, you know, just this action. Have you considered a career in modeling? I mean, really nice. And then you put here, and then you're talking and you're smiling, and you pretend as if there is no effort involved. Well done. Yes, you deserve it, absolutely. But here is the question. Could you have gotten to this stage, to being such good walkers without having fallen hundreds and thousands of times? Not even Vincent could have reached that stage without it. It's not possible. Learn to fail or fail to learn. And as kids, we know it. And you know, we fall down and we maybe cry a little bit if it hurts, but then we get up again and we fall down and we laugh. In fact, let's see an example of someone learning how to walk.
Go get mommy. Go get her. Go get mommy.
Oh, good job. Oh, good job.
Hey, Sophie.
Can you walk back to Daddy? Once. Give me your hand.
Slow down. Slow down.
She's so hyper.
Go get mommy. Go get mommy. Go get mommy. Go get her. Take your time, baby. Take your time, baby girl.
Slow down. Are you excited that you can walk now?
The joy of learning. The joy of... Where is it? Where is it? Where does it go? Well, it goes away because we come to a certain age where we begin to understand that other people are watching us, and then the image kicks in. Oh, no, I'm not going to try because what if I fall? Oh, no, I'm not going to ask her out because what if she says no? Oh, no, I'm not going to try for this play because hardly anyone gets that. Oh, no, I'm not going to share because what if they don't like what I have to say? Oh, no, everyone is so smart, I'm not going to speak up. And we avoid instead of coping. And that affects our self-esteem, our confidence, our resilience, our happiness levels in the long term. Or we go on a date and everything has to be so perfect. So perfect. Forgetting how we learned how to eat in the first place. Learn to fail or fail to learn. This is not actually a concrete recommendation for your first date. I don't think it will work. But remember how we learned. There is no other way. No other way to grow, no other way to learn, no other way to become more resilient, happier, more successful. Have I said this before? This is my personal mantra that I repeat to myself over and over again, especially after failures, especially before doing things when I'm afraid to do them and when I said, well, maybe I shouldn't do. Because what happens if? Well, what happens if? What happens if is worst case scenario, I learn. Worst case scenario, it hurts. But I'll bounce back up again. You know, I'll bounce back up after Rena. I can handle anything. Wei Ji, the Chinese character for crisis, has two parts. The first part is danger. This is the top character. The bottom character, opportunity. There's the danger of failing, and wherever there is a crisis, there is also an opportunity to learn and grow. Edward Hubbard, the greatest mistake a man can make is to be afraid of making one. I want to show you an example of a person who made mistakes, who failed time and time and again. In fact, I was thinking of labeling that person or giving him the position of the ultimate failure. And here is why. At the age of 22, already, just started his new job, lost it. Didn't leave, he lost it. At the age of 23, decided to go into politics because he wasn't doing well in other jobs, but didn't make it there either. And then he went back to business, didn't make it there. At the age of 27, it was just too much for him, just too much, and he collapsed, had a nervous breakdown. But then got up again after falling, and at the age of 34, 7 years after his nervous breakdown, he ran for Congress, wasn't even close, didn't make it. At the age of 39, hasn't learned the lesson yet, and was defeated again for Congress. And then he said, let me go try higher. At the age of 46, what a loser. Doesn't learn, does he? Okay, yeah, it's okay, learn to fail, fail to learn, but, I mean, you're 46 years old, come on. Give it up already. At the age of 47, he tried to be nominated for the vice president. Didn't learn. Didn't make it. So at the age of 50, he tried again for Senate. And then he almost gave up. But he didn't. And at the age of 51, he became the 16th president of the United States. Arguably the most important president this country has ever had. And through it all, and he talked about it, it was difficult to fail. Of course he had victories, I simplified the process. It was difficult to fail. He did not enjoy failing, but he persisted because he understood, just like every other successful person throughout history has understood and understands. There is no other way to learn. There is no other way to grow. Mahatma Gandhi, the subtitle of his book is My Experiments with Truth. He talks about experiments, trying and failing and succeeding, and failing again and trying again. Those of you who know his story, in South Africa he tried exactly, or very similar to what he tried later in India. In South Africa he failed miserably. But then he went over to India and tried there, and there, after many failures, he succeeded in bringing independence to his country. More than anyone understands the importance of failure. Freedom is not worth having if it does not connote freedom to err. And when he talks about freedom to err, he means it on the national level, being self-determined, free people. He also means it on the individual level. My favorite author, my favorite writer is George Eliot. Her name was Mary Ann Evans, changed to George Eliot because at the time when she published, mid-19th to late 19th century, it was very difficult for a woman to be published. George Eliot had this to say: the important work of moving the world forward does not wait to be done by perfect men or women. And if you read her text, it's as close to perfection as I've ever encountered, whether it's Middlemarch or Daniel Deronda, which is my favorite book. Just do it. Just act. Be prepared to fail. I want to share an example. Once again, a video of a person who understands his imperfections and yet gives himself the permission to fail. Here is a TV presenter.
That's right, Bennett Brower here with another commentary. Didn't think the suits would have me back, perhaps. Thought they'd have my derriere replaced by one of those cookie-cutter store mannequins. Well, maybe I'm not the norm. I'm not camera-friendly. I don't wear clothes that fit me. I'm not a heartbreaker. I haven't had sex with a woman. I don't know how that works. I guess I don't fall in line. I'm not hygienic. I don't wipe properly. I lack style. I have no charisma or self-esteem. I don't own a toothbrush or let my scabs heal. I can't reach all the parts of my body. When I sleep, I sweat profusely. But I guess the powers that be will keep signing my paycheck, at least until John and Jane Q. Viewer start to go for the remote so they can get back to watching commentators who don't frighten children and don't eat their own dandruff and don't pop their whiteheads with a compass they used in high school. Thank you, Kevin.
Bennett Brower, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
In sports, Babe Ruth, at the time the most home runs out of any other player, held the record for many years. How many people know that he also topped the league 5 years? 5 years he topped the league in strikeouts. Very often the case that the most successful athletes are also ones who have failed the most. And if you reach for the stands, you have to be prepared to fail many times. Or the greatest of them all. Before he learned how to fly, he learned how to walk. Before he learned how to walk, he learned how to crawl, and he fell many times. Here he is, in his own words, the one and only Michael Jordan.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Michael. I love Michael Jordan. People remember his game-winning shot that made him famous. Was it North Carolina, where he shot with the buzzer and they won? Do you remember that he had 20, or did you know that he had 26 game-winning shots that he missed? Or that he failed time and time again? Which is why he succeeds. There is no other way. Thomas Edison, remember, I failed my way to success. 10,000 times failures before he invented the light bulb, but he didn't see them as failures. He succeeded in showing what doesn't work. Anita Roddick, founder of The Body Shop, passed away last year. Did fantastic work, changed the business world in many ways to make more compassionate business. Failed time and time again and succeeded. No other way. Amy Edmondson is now a professor across the river, Harvard Business School. She was a graduate student here in the psychology department when I was an undergraduate. And I remember when she was working on her dissertation, because we had the same advisor. We were both working with Richard Hackman. And her work was, and still is, to some extent, in hospitals. And what she wanted to understand was, how can you help eliminate, or at least reduce, failure rates in hospitals? Why? Because medical errors cost millions and billions of dollars a year, and much more importantly, many people lose their lives as a result of medical errors. So she wanted to understand this phenomenon and how you can reduce it. And she was working with Richard Hackman, who's been doing work for decades on effective groups. Those of you who have taken his class, Psychology 1501, know him. If you haven't taken his class, put it on the top of your list. And he has done work on teams, on groups, for many years. And what he found was that there are certain conditions that if they're put in place in an organization, the group is more likely to perform well, certain conditions. And what Amy Edmondson wanted to do in her dissertation was show that when hospitals implement Richard Hackman's advice, when they have the conditions that Richard Hackman talks about, such as a clear, engaging goal for the team, for the group, such as an enabling team structure, such as supportive organization, such as effective coaching. When a group has these conditions in place, it will not only perform better, which is the research that Hackman illustrated for decades, they will also commit less medical errors. Very important research. So she did this research. It took her a very long time. She went to the field, studied hospitals, and after a long time, again, this was on the 15th floor in William James Hall, I remember that, she one day got her results, entered all her data into SPSS, pressed the button, and there was significant statistical difference between the two groups. The group that implemented Hackman's conditions and the group that did not. Eureka, she was happy, ecstatic, years of work, and she runs to Richard's office and says to him, "Richard, I got it, here are the results." He says, "Let's see, I want to see." So he looks at it and he says, "Amy, that's fantastic. They were very significant results. It wasn't just borderline. This is great, fantastic." And he looks at it and then he says, "Are you sure these are the results?" And she said, "Yeah, they're highly significant." He said, "Are you sure? Did you enter the data again and test it?" Yeah. She's very methodical, very hardworking. She said, "Yeah, I did." So he said, "These are certainly significant, but they're significant in the opposite direction." Meaning, the hospitals that implemented these conditions that Hackman talks about were actually making more medical errors. Again, this went in the face of decades of research, never specifically about medical errors, but about so many other related topics. And he said, well, a result is a result, reality is reality. We have to go back to the field and understand why. We have to understand this phenomenon. So she had to go back to the drawing board. Tired, enervated, didn't understand what happened, went back to the hospitals, and in almost no time realized what the issue was. These hospitals, or groups within these hospitals, that made more mistakes did not actually make more mistakes. They reported more mistakes. In fact, the other groups who on paper made less mistakes actually made many more mistakes. However, they did not report them. Now, how did she know that? Because there are certain mistakes that you cannot hide. It's very difficult to hide a corpse, for example. So the real major mistakes that were made, they were out there, and these groups had to report these. It's not that they made less, they made more mistakes, but they didn't report. And then she changed the focus of her research to the notion of psychological safety. Psychological safety is the feeling, the experience, the space that you feel in your workplace, in your organization, where you feel safe talking about errors and mistakes, where you feel safe falling down and getting up again. And these organizations where there was psychological safety, they performed better. And she's shown this again. This was 1999. A lot of research done by her and people around the world, showing how groups, organizations where there is psychological safety, where the employees are not afraid of whistleblowing or are not afraid of falling down, of making mistakes, these organizations are significantly more successful. These are learning organizations, where the employees constantly learn and grow, where you learn from your mistakes, and then the next time you're able to do better. Very significant, very important research, whether it's for leaders, whether it's for parents. Many of you will be future parents. Is there psychological safety for your kids where they feel comfortable talking to you about things that they did not do well, about failures? Because if they do feel comfortable, they are much less likely to enter into this perfectionistic fear of failure, and they're much more likely to be happier as well as successful. There's a story about Thomas Watson, founder of IBM, one organization that invented and reinvented itself numerous times, continues on a daily basis, and that's why it survives. So there was an employee at the beginning when IBM was founded. They were making typewriters. An employee made a strategic error, and the error was that he actually lost IBM $1 million. And $1 million at that time for IBM was a lot of money. So the next day, after he had made that mistake, he comes to see Thomas Watson, the founder, and gives him a letter. Thomas Watson opens the letter and reads it and looks at the employee and says, "What is this?" He says, "Sir, it's my letter of resignation." "Why resignation, sir? I just made a mistake that cost the organization $1 million. I don't want, you've been great to me. I don't want you to put you through this difficult experience of firing me, so I'm resigning." Thomas took the letter and tore it and said, "Fire you? Fire you? I've just invested $1 million in your education and I'm going to fire you?" Now, whether the story is exactly true or almost true, it's still a story that circulates around IBM, and a story that creates a certain reality in IBM, a reality that says you have to try. There's a similar story in Johnson & Johnson, one of the most successful companies in the world, where General Johnson, one of the two founders, with his other brother, also called Johnson, which is why it's called Johnson & Johnson. So Jim Burke was an up-and-coming employee in Johnson & Johnson, made a mistake that cost the organization a lot of money, was called in the morning by General Johnson, who was a very austere, very tough man, and Jim Burke comes in, all shivering and scared, and he comes in, walks into General Johnson's office, and General Johnson walks from around his table, goes to him and says, "Congratulations, Jim Burke, congratulations." "Sir, I just made a mistake, sir." "Yes, I know. This is the only way to learn. The more mistakes you make, the more successful we'll be. Congratulations." And Jim Burke was all happy and about to walk out. And then General Johnson said, "Oh, just one more thing, Jim. If you make the same mistake again, I'm going to fire you." But again, a story that goes around Johnson & Johnson about the importance of failure. Jim Burke, by the way, became the most successful CEO of Johnson & Johnson. Thomas Watson. I'm almost done. 1 minute. Almost done. If you want to increase your success rate, double your failure rate. We talked about this research. The origins of genius. The most successful artists, the most successful scientists in history are also the ones who have failed the most times, who have the most duds. It's the Edisons, it's the Da Vinci's, it's the Michelangelos, it's the Marie Curie. The most successful scientists and artists have also failed the most. And finally, Jane Clem, who did research on people's success in dieting or people's success in starting an exercise regime. What she found was that the most successful people who have been able to persist, are people who have failed on average 5 times before. So I've been on 5 diets that haven't succeeded. The 5th one or the 6th one, I'm successful and I'm able to sustain it. The same with an exercise regime. Learn to fail or fail to learn. See you on Thursday.